I live in Fargo. I'm an architect. I am a product of the public schools, and I have 2 degrees from NDSU, master's from Ohio State. I did teach at the university level at the University of Southern California before moving back here. And we have 4 children, and we homeschool. I'll try to be brief here. I have a 13-year-old son. 4 years ago, had a problem. We finally found a neuro-optometrist to diagnose it correctly. He had problems with visual tracking. His eyes didn't go left to right together. And he had a lot of emotional pain and physical pain from this process. It was kind of amazing how traumatic this was. But after 2 years of difficult visual therapy, his vision was cured. About a year ago, he was required to take a standardized test, and a woman from the public schools came to administer it, and he did extremely poorly. So he can really only read about 20 minutes before he's really fatigued. 20 minutes has perfect vision. After about 20 minutes or 25 minutes, the fatigue takes in, and his vision is very difficult at that point. So he needs breaks. The certified teacher that gave him the test didn't give him breaks, adequate breaks. In fact, we learned later that the public schools give a similar test, but they do one section one day and wait a couple days and do another section, typically over 2 weeks, sometimes more, which they give these standardized tests. And that would have been advantageous. So we were very disappointed and stressed after all of our efforts to help him overcome his visual problems and catch up academically. He scored below the 30th percentile in the standardized test. And then, of course, it was summer, and we got this letter from the public schools in Fargo with the law outlined that he needs to be assessed by the public school, a team of experts, and we need to come up with a remediation plan, and perhaps he needs to enter the public schools and so forth. And part of our stress was trying over the last 4 years to rebuild his self-esteem. And when you have a problem like that that has such dire symptoms and consequences, he really lost his self-esteem, his confidence in his ability to achieve academically. And we had carefully put those things back in place over time as his vision got better and so forth, and as he caught up. So we felt if he had to go, under the microscope, under what they call an IEP in the public schools, we feared this would leave pretty deep emotional scars, and we may not be able to recover his self-esteem. And fortunately, the person in the Fargo schools was very cooperative, and we administered our own standardized tests during the summer, where we had hired our own certified teacher to administer it, but we gave it once a day, in small chunks. And the results of that test were extremely good. Now, I'm telling the story because it was extremely stressful for us. And we had gone to great lengths to get the expertise involved to help our son and to cure his vision problem. And here, we get a letter from the public school saying, look, you really need an expert to see what's going on. When we already knew what was going on and had done the work and paid the medical costs to fix it. And we were concerned that we might have lost our ability to homeschool him, which is the one reason he was where he was academically. And it brings me to a point that, while the public schools in our case were cooperative and accepted the second test, they didn't have to legally. If they wanted to, they could have forced their hand with the law, and there would be nothing we can do. And like I said, it would have been devastating emotionally to them. Now, one thing I think that needs to be understood, I've heard the complaint, well, what about homeschoolers that fall through the cracks? Okay. The difference between the strength of homeschooling is the tutorial style of learning, the one-on-one. So with our children, for example, if there's an area of material they haven't understood, we go back and cover it again until they get it. And of course, there's some areas they excel, and we have to give them more and more material more quickly than we thought. So there really isn't a point where that student falls through the crack academically. Of course, all of the homeschooling parents I know are very concerned. The reason they homeschool is because they care very deeply about their children and their success academically, as well as in terms of their faith, oftentimes. Now, parents who don't care as much about their kids' education, I understand some of the concerns about falling through the cracks, but those people mostly would leave their kids in the public school. It would be easier for them than to take them out. And I understand that some parents say they're homeschooling, but they're not. But my personal opinion is that they're not homeschooling, that's just abuse. And so I'm talking strictly about those students who homeschool. And on the other hand, in a classroom setting where it's not one-on-one, you can lecture and teach. And you know that some of the students are getting almost all the material, and some are getting most of it, but there's a chunk of them who really aren't getting it. By definition, if you look at the results of the standardized tests, these achievement tests, any student who's under the 30th percentile in homeschooling has to be assessed and have a remediation plan. Yet, by definition, 29% of the public school students always fall under the 30th percentile, repeatedly. Why the double standard? Why would those students need to be monitored by our public schools? And the answer is, there shouldn't be a double standard. There should be an understanding that the parents who homeschool are very concerned and they understand the strengths of tutorial style of learning. So while there may be some cases of abuse, I don't really see the danger of students falling through the cracks. And so I wanted to relay that story because this law really put us through a lot of stress, and would have, if the fellow in the public schools wasn't as understanding, accepting our second test score and so forth, following this law would have been devastating to our son. And we shouldn't be subjected to this sort of oversight. So thank you.
Are there any questions for Mr. Sorum?
I'll be around afterwards if somebody does have a question.
Okay, thank you. Further testimony and support of House Bill 1211.